It's great to have Bill with us. Bill Sherburg, the author of writing the big book, The Creation of AA. This book, if you're new, was published in 2019, and we've been reading it with him since 2020. And we're on chapter 11 here in this time around, and it's Bill titled it Chasing Testimonials. And of course, his wife was very much involved in the putting this book together. We should mention that, Lady Sarah. And this is in July 1938. Now, I'm going to put a section on the up on the screen for us if you haven't got the book yet. And Bill, you have a new edition coming out, or is there going to be there's something happening with it, isn't there? Would you just mention that for us? Is there going to be a new? You said I think you said it's going to be a couple of months though.
Yeah, yeah. If I'm lucky, it'll be a couple of months. So
If you're lucky, yeah.
I've legally gotten the rights to the book back, but we're still having trouble adjudicating that entire settlement. So we'll see how this goes.
Brilliant. It's great to have you here, Bill. And of course, Jim Worley is going to be reading as well. And Jim was with on the Facebook. I'm sure many of us dip in and out of that on a daily basis. A History Only. Great work that Jim does there. Good to have you, Jim. So, chapter 11, Chasing Testimonials, and it's July, as I said, 1938. And if you're following on your book, it's on page 201 we're starting. And with that, it's over to Mr. Sherburg.
Thank you, David. Before approaching any more new prospects for money, Bill decided he should first solicit some favorable medical opinion about the work that they were doing and about the 2 chapters already written. These testimonials could then be used to create a solid professional foundation for the appeals he would be making to prospects on the list of millionaires given him by Willard Richardson. On July 1st, he and Fitz Mayo left Brooklyn, taking the train down to Maryland for what would be the first leg of an 11-day road trip in search of strong endorsements from some of the nation's most important doctors and psychiatrists.
Fitz Mayo.
John Henry Fitzhugh Mayo, at this time more than 2.5 years sober, was the second most important man after Hank Parkhurst, helping Bill Wilson with the work on the East Coast. And his name is frequently mentioned in Frank Amos's correspondence and notes during this time. Despite the fact that Fitz lived in Cumberston, Maryland, 5 miles south of Annapolis and 30 miles due east of Washington, D.C., he had become one of Bill's closest and most trusted friends. Off by himself in Maryland, Fitz today would be called a loner, someone staying sober without the help of a nearby AA group. But he tempered his isolation by frequently traveling 230 miles north to stay with Bill and Lois in Brooklyn. For their own part, the Wilsons returned the favor by visiting Fitz and his family at Cumberston with such regularity that Lois could say, with just a bit of exaggeration, that she and Bill had practically commuted to his home in Maryland. As Bill Wilson's other early stalwart in AA, Fitz Mayo could hardly have been more different from Henry G. Parkhurst. The 2 men were, in fact, almost polar opposites. Hank was a loud, confident, high-energy man of action, and Fitz was, quote, a charming, aesthetic, impractical, lovable dreamer, end quote. While Fitz was subject to spells of lethargy and depressive bouts of self-pity, Hank's emotional life revolved around his boisterous enthusiasm and seething resentments. The 2 men also stood at opposite ends of the critical debate over religion in AA. Hank was something of a deist, while Fitz had returned to the Episcopalian faith of his minister father, and he had done so with a deep and abiding commitment. His faith in God was unshakable, and his conviction that God was responsible for the gift of his sobriety unquestioned. Mayo's dreamy and practical nature is evident in the checkered business life he led before getting sober at the age of 38. His first job was in the accounting department of a large company, where he was responsible for collecting receivables. Having lost that job, he moved on to try his hand as a traveling salesman. He then became a real estate salesman, and after that, a teacher at a boys' school in Norfolk, Virginia. Failing at that, he finally decided to become a farmer, working a plot of land at Cumberstone, which was near his original hometown in Maryland. Fitz's married life was fraught with similar ups and downs. Married in 1921, He and his wife Elizabeth had 3 children over the next 10 years, but their relationship was hardly a smooth one. An understandable situation given his increasingly morose, drunken habits. But even after he quit drinking in late 1935, Fitz candidly admitted that members of the family continued to annoy him, and marital discord seemed to be more the rule than the exception in the Mayo household. While sober, he once abandoned his, quote, wife at home sick, end quote, to board a train after being, quote, unkind to her in leaving, end quote. In his big book story, Our Southern Friend, Fitz relates an incident similar to this, confessing in his first person present tense narrative, quote, things are not going so well at home. I am learning that I cannot have my own way as I used to. I blame my wife and children. Anger possesses me, anger such as I have never felt before. I will not stand for it. I pack my bags and leave, quote, end quote, and goes to stay with understanding friends. In all likelihood, those understanding friends were the Wilsons, who found themselves deeply enmeshed in the Mayo's marital problems on more than a few occasions over the years. In February of 1938, 4 months before this July road trip, Lois had written to Bill, who was then visiting at Cumberstone, quote, why don't you bring Fitz back with you and come home soon? The more I think about it, the more it seems to me that Fitz ought not to live at home yet, that he isn't yet ready to tackle the family, that they are all happier when he is away and he himself a different man, end quote. 3 weeks later, Lois was herself on an extended trip to Cumberstone, and she wrote Bill that she had just told Elizabeth, quote, how fine Fitz was doing, and in spite of wanting him better, it probably hurt her to think he is fine as soon as he gets away from home, end quote. Despite his 2.5 years of sobriety, Fitz-Mayo had not yet acquired enough emotional stability or resiliency to successfully navigate the turmoil of his own family life. Nor was Fitz successful in getting people sober using the methods he had learned in New York. Back in Maryland, he desperately missed the Brooklyn Fellowship and did his best to recreate the same type of community on a local level, but it wasn't working for him and it wasn't working for others. Quote, a man calls me on the phone, end quote, he recounts in his big book story. Quote, will I take a young fellow who's been drinking for 2 weeks to live with me? Soon I have others who are alcoholics and some who have other problems. I begin to play God. I feel that I can fix them all. I do not fix anyone, end quote. Abandoning his attempts to sober up people at home, one can only imagine how much this must have aggravated his already unstable family situation. By March 1937, Fitz was trying to run a mission in the nearby town of Shadyside. This project was neither successful nor very long-lived. Lois even placed the word mission in scare quotes when she mentions visiting there in her diary. And all this work with alcoholics in Maryland wasn't the only thing going poorly for Fitz. Leaving his family to fend for themselves, he frequently decamped to nearby Washington, D.C., where he stayed with his sister Agnes, who worked there. Although these efforts did finally produce some slim positive results, they were meager indeed. In late 1937, Fitz got a friend named Jackie Williams sober, and Jackie in turn sobered up Jim Burwell. But then Jackie drank again and eventually died drunk, while Jim left for New York, where he carried out all of his subsequent 1938 escapades. For all this hard work, Fitz had almost no luck in actually getting people sober. Perhaps the problem was his consistently strong emphasis on God when delivering his appeals, but whatever the cause, as Bill Wilson later admitted, quote, near failure dogged his efforts for years, end quote. Grievously compounding all these issues, the work brought in no money whatsoever, and the Mayos were in desperate need of significant financial support. Their large household and Elizabeth's ongoing medical problems demanded at least a moderate flow of regular income for them just to keep their heads above water.
Bill and Fitz set out.
Taking the train from New York City, Bill and Fitz first stopped in Maryland and then traveled farther south to Suffolk, Virginia, a city immediately west of Norfolk, where they spent the night with Dr. Charles Hedges and his wife, Margaret. Hedges was one of the 10 New York success stories Hank Parkhurst would describe in his presentation to the board of the Alcoholic Fund 1 month later as, quote, definitely recovered, but who are out of touch with the group, end quote. Hedges had been the director of the prestigious Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore during the late 1920s and early 1930s before becoming superintendent for New York City's Roosevelt Hospital early in 1934. 2 years later, his drinking had spun so far out of control that he was, quote, kicked off the staff of the hospital. He finally quit drinking in January or February of 1937 with the help of Wilson and Parkhurst, and once sober, almost immediately petitioned Bill Wilson for assistance with his brother-in-law, Paul Kellogg, who also desperately needed to stop drinking, something Paul did in July of 1937, but with later mixed results.
Dr. Hedges is on board.
Bill says that when they met in Virginia, where Hedges now worked for the local public health service, they couldn't help but notice, quote, that Charles's skepticism had gone, end quote, implying that the doctor had been something of an agnostic when he first came through the fellowship. But to Bill's amusement, he discovered that not only was Hedges no longer a skeptic, he was now a fervent and active believer in the religious solution that was being offered to him in New York in early 1937. Wilson notes Riley, quote, there were even traces of him being overgrouped, end quote, implying that Charles Hedges was now deeply involved in the local Oxford group. Bill and Fitz gave Charles a full report about the general state of affairs in both New York and Akron, and then explained their plans for the book project, proudly showing him the 2 chapters already written and the outline for how the rest of the book would be organized. Hedges, quote, got up a lot of steam right away, end quote, and in his enthusiasm, immediately volunteered to help these 2 friends with introductions to some former colleagues at Johns Hopkins, the most respected medical school and teaching hospital in the country. This was almost more than Bill and Fitz could have hoped for. Johns Hopkins was established in 1889, and it quickly became the founding institution of modern American medicine. Its importance in transforming the antiquated practices then used in the United States and the world can hardly be overestimated. During its first 40 years of existence, Johns Hopkins had revolutionized the art, the science, and the teaching of medicine, constantly inventing new medical procedures and life-saving operations while training a host of well-educated doctors to carry that knowledge out into every area of the country. In July 1938, there was no more important or prestigious medical establishment in the country, so any testimonials Bill and Fitz might garner from members of its staff would be the most valuable and impressive professional endorsements that they could possibly get.
2 Johns Hopkins psychiatrists weigh in.
Charles Hedges claimed that he was still in touch with several leading people on the psychiatric staff, and he insisted on driving Bill and Fitz over there to meet them. The 2 men drove 230 miles up to Baltimore, and Hedges arranged an interview with Dr. Leslie Homan and Dr. Esther Richards, 2 doctors that Hedges claimed were, quote, considered tops in psychiatry, end quote. At the time, both doctors were active on the staff of Johns Hopkins and served as associates in psychiatry when teaching at the university.
By now, Bill was well practiced at this presentation, and he launched into his explanation of who they were and what they were doing. He then, quote, gave them the 2 chapters of the book to read, asking that they point out where we were wrong in any of our statements about the hopelessness of alcoholism and the mental conditions surrounding it. Wilson claims that based on what he had just heard, Dr. Homan responded with a statement that pleased him immensely. Quote, Homan tossed the ball right back with the flat pronouncement that in his judgment, we were 100% correct in our attitudes and belief about the true alcoholic. Pointing to Fitz and me, he said, quote, I will go even further than you people have and make the flat statement that alcoholics of your type are 100% incurable on any basis save religion. Although I am not a religionist, I have great respect for its powers in these cases. If I can possibly avoid it, I never take such a case as yours. They are too heartbreaking, end quote. What could be clearer or more supportive than this for Wilson's thesis about, quote, the hopelessness of alcoholism and the mental conditions surrounding it, end quote. As far as Bill was concerned, he had just received the ultimate seal of approval from the most respected psychiatrist in the country, and bundling this with Dr. Jung's earlier diagnosis of Roland Hazard, he claimed that, quote, we now have the authority of the best man in Europe and of Johns Hopkins on the question of incurability, end quote. Let any alcoholic who thinks he can successfully moderate his own drinking take note of this lethal diagnosis. All of his efforts are doomed to failure, and his only hope of a cure is to, quote, commence to seek God with ardor and at once, end quote.
Now, another issue which came up during this interview was the firm conviction expressed by both Holman and Richards that AA would need to clearly define and avoid those unfortunates who could not be helped by their religious cure for alcoholism. As noted earlier, this was not a new topic of discussion within the fellowship. There had already been a fair amount of exclusionary talk about people with problems other than alcohol, people who were therefore impervious to their solution. In the outline for the book written a few weeks earlier, Hank Parkhurst had noted that the alcoholic sufferer, quote, cannot be too much handicapped by other great mental and nervous abnormalities. He said our failures with many such types prove that this cure will not work for everyone. And the end of the quote was on types. Dr. Richards was particularly adamant on this point, claiming those who have suffered, quote, organic deteriorations, end quote, from their drinking, along with those who were, quote, constitutional, end quote, psychopaths, must be carefully avoided, she said, as potential candidates for membership in Alcoholics Anonymous.
Providing perhaps more medical details than even Bill Wilson was looking for, she told him,
it is very necessary that you have some competent psychiatric check on the alcoholics can be of value to. The signs of organic brain disease deterioration are something that a layman cannot detect, and many doctors are. It is very necessary that you have some competent psychiatric. It is very necessary that you have some competent psychiatric check on the type of alcoholics you can be expected to be of value to. The signs of organic brain disease deterioration are something that a layman cannot detect, and many doctors are in the same boat. These signs are found in a careful examination of the brain and cord. They represent the nature of the defect rather than disturbance in functioning. These organic deteriorations and constitutional are two types which you cannot have any success with. And I think even those enthusiastic units would not be disciplined by failures.
Wilson, along with most other early members of Alcoholics Anonymous, was extremely sensitive to the percentage rate of their success, and Bill was constantly guilty of inflating those numbers. In Akron, the standards were far more stringent than New York. Parentheses, excluding anyone who didn't first make a public surrender, closed parentheses. But at this time, both groups were doing their best to exclude those who suffered from, quote, grave emotional and mental disorders, end quote.
Following the initial interview, Bill thanked Charles Hedges profusely for being so, quote, instrumental in setting afoot big things at Johns Hopkins, end quote. And then he and Fitz returned to the farm in Cumberstone. Giving Dr. Holman time to read over the chapters, the two men returned to Johns Hopkins a few days later, this time with Ebby Thatcher in tow, for a follow-up interview. Holman was even more positive and enthusiastic about their work and, quote-unquote, much impressed with everything he had read. Bill commented that he again confirmed his belief in, quote, the proposition that drunks of our type have to get out from under on a spiritual basis, end quote. There was just no other option. The doctor then gave them, quote, a lot of valuable advice about our manuscript and our procedure, end quote, and noted that, quote, from the standpoint of a psychologist, he could find no fault whatever with our procedure, our theories about ourselves, and our mental state, end quote. Holman was in complete agreement with everything he had read in, quote unquote, There Is a Solution. In Bill's story, Wilson noted that his only, quote, criticism was devoted to showing us how we could better express our ideas and avoid controversy, end quote. Bill confessed he felt, quote unquote, huge delight as he listened to Dr. Holman's sweeping validation of his theories about alcoholism and the doctor's agreement that their program of recovery was the only one that had any hope of success. This was exactly the kind of professional endorsement Wilson had hoped to gain on this trip, one that he was confident would prove to be an effective selling tool once he got back to New York and again had to face that host of rich but skeptical potential donors.
A loan from Agnes Mayo.
But none of these wonderful testimonials put any immediate cash in the bank, and the balance there was running precariously low. Frank Amos had been making regular payments to Dr. Bob Smith from Rockefeller's contribution to the quote-unquote alcoholic fund, in parentheses, $500 in March, $450 in April, $500 in May, and $200 in June, end parentheses. And he had also been giving cash to Wilson and Mayo from the money sent to him by Charles Towns, and parenthetically, $200 in cash to each of them on both May 9th and May 27th, and a final $200 to Bill on July 5th, close parentheses. Curiously, Amos makes no mention of sending any money to Hank Parkhurst, presumably because he was still generating at least a small amount of income with his honor dealers operation. Well, this left a comfortable balance in the Rockefeller account specifically earmarked for Dr. Bob Smith and his work in Akron. It exhausted the $1,000 Towns had contributed to the alcoholic fund for Wilson and his friends. Once again, they were flat broke. Given their desperate financial situation, on Monday, July 11th, Bill made one last stop in Washington, D.C. before catching the train back to New York City, visiting Fitz's younger sister, Agnes. Unlike her brother, Agnes Mayo had a thriving career and an excellent job. She was secretary of the Corcoran School of Art in Washington, and the kind of person who had always been careful with her money. Bill was hoping to convince Agnes to dip into her savings and offer them some, quote, substantial assistance in bridging the gap of the next few months, end quote, by making him a short-term loan of $1,000, promising to pay it back in less than 3 months. Since the average salary in the U.S. at this time was less than $2,000 a year, this was a significant amount to be loaning Bill. But to his great relief, Agnes agreed to his request, and he left Washington, D.C.'s Union Station with a check for the full amount in his pocket. It was the perfect ending to a long and very successful road trip. Wilson was coming home with strong, positive endorsements from 2 of the country's most respected psychiatrists, and he had even secured enough cash for them to continue their full-time fundraising efforts for at least a couple of months. It must have made for a very exhilarating train ride back to Penn Station in New York City. Bill returned to Brooklyn that night, Monday, July 11th, and the following Thursday, he wrote Agnes a letter detailing the specific arrangements for the loan and his promise to pay it back in full by October 1st.
My dear Agnes, I cannot tell you how grateful we all are for your substantial assistance. It will be most helpful in bridging the gap for the next few months. After consulting with Mr. Frank B. Amos, custodian of our fund, it will simplify matters if I assume personally the obligation to repay you $1,000, which you have loaned me as of July 11th, 1938. The understanding is that I may have the use of this money until October 1st at 6% interest. On or before that date, I fully expect to be able to repay you out of funds which I am collecting on behalf of the alcoholic work. In the event that all or part of this sum cannot be paid by October 1st, I would like to continue the loan on the same basis until January 1st, 1939, by which time we shall certainly have received ample funds. I am today depositing this check with our custodian, Mr. Amos. It is understood, however, that the other funds which already have been contributed to this purpose and which have been specified definitely for certain phases of the work are not now, nor will be, available for repayment of this loan to you. In other words, it is my personal obligation, in which my associates join me wholeheartedly, to raise additional funds out of which we will make this repayment. Though I would like to make the other funds previously contributed surety for you, I find that under the terms of which they were donated, these funds cannot be used for repayment of any borrowed money. As we agreed, your personal security lies in our ability to raise this money, of which I have no doubt whatsoever. I am sending this letter in triplicate and wish you would return 2 copies on which you have stated your approval of the arrangement as outlined above. One of these I shall turn over to Mr. Amos. I have just endorsed your check and deposited with him as trustee. Affectionately yours, Bill Wilson, William G. Wilson, WGW, LM.
There are a number of interesting things worth noting in this letter. First of all, Bill's assumption that it will simplify matters if he takes personal responsibility for the loan implies he had earlier assured Agnes that the funds already deposited in the alcoholic fund would stand as security for her loan. Frank Amos had obviously disabused Bill of this understanding, pointing out that the only possible surety for Agnes's loan would be his personal promise to raise sufficient funds before the loan came due on October 1st. Wilson was once again supremely confident of his own abilities as a successful fundraiser, this time specifically during the next 11 weeks. In addition, despite the fact that this was now a personal loan, Bill made it clear that his guarantee is just a necessary formality regarding the mechanics of repayment. This was not really a personal loan, and the check was not going to be deposited into the Wilson bank account. Instead, it was being handed over to Frank Amos with Agnes's check endorsed over to him as the trustee of that fund. Bill was being absolutely scrupulous in relation to the handling of this money, hoping to avoid any possibility that some later investigator unearthed the story and alleging that he had been using his work with alcoholics to line his own pockets. Also of interest is Bill's promise to pay 6% interest on this loan. A typical annual interest rate on bank deposits in 1938 was 3.5%. So this is an excellent short-term investment for Agnes Mayo. Whether Agnes was a tough negotiator or Bill was just sweetening the deal to make it more attractive is unknown. Curiously, for someone with such business acumen, Bill Wilson does not specify quote-unquote per annum in the terms of this letter. However, it's unlikely that Wilson was promised to pay a 6% interest rate on a loan with a term of less than 3 months. Much more likely, the per annum was implied here based on the conversation he had with Agnes Mayo in Washington, D.C. the previous Monday. A minor but final item of interest are the initials WGW:LM following the signature line. The home address listed at the top of the page identifies this letter as coming from 182 Clinton Street in Brooklyn, but there is no further information about who this new typist might be. At the time, none of the members of the New York group had the initials LM, nor did any of their last names begin with an M, other than Fitz-Mayo, who did not take this letter to his sister. Although Bill has previously identified some of his letters as being typed in Brooklyn, this is the first one to provide any clue as to who the mysterious home typist might be. But that clue is so insubstantial that we are left with little more than a nameless assistant who is helping Wilson with his at-home secretarial work. It does, however, provide conclusive evidence that at this time, Wilson did have resources other than Ruth Hawk to help him with his occasional typing needs. Agnes accepted both Bill's explanation and his conditions for the loan, signing her name next to the approved line at the bottom of this letter and sending 2 of these countersigned copies back to Wilson.
A flurry of letters.
The next day, Bill abandoned his mysterious typist in Brooklyn and traveled to Newark, where he dictated at least 8 letters to Ruth Hawk. Several of these provide most of the details we have about Bill's road trip with Fitz-Mayo, but when taken together, they provide something more important, a wonderfully revealing snapshot of one day in the life of Bill Wilson as he was living it on Friday, July 15th, 1938.
Bill's first letter was a straightforward thank you to Dr. Leslie Homan at Johns Hopkins, telling him how much he appreciated meeting him and expressing his gratitude for, quote, the very real interest, close quotes, the doctor had shown in their program of recovery. Wilson reminded Homan of his offer to continue reviewing and critiquing their book, quote, as we get further on with our writing, close quotes, and expressed his hope that theirs would not just be, quote, a one-sided arrangement, close quotes, but that, quote, it will turn out that we can be of real use to you in some fashion or other, close quotes, in the future. Bill was not about to let this prestigious connection with Johns Hopkins slip away from him, and he fully intended to continue fostering as close a relationship as possible with Dr. Homan.
Thank you to Dr. Hedges.
His next letter went to Dr. Charles Hedges, sincerely thanking him for the introduction he had engineered with the two famous psychiatrists at Johns Hopkins, and reiterating how pleased he was with the results of their trip to Baltimore. Wilson also informed him that he had not yet followed up on another contact Charles had provided, a Professor Hammond in New York City. Bill is curious to know if Hedges had written to Hammond yet, and asked if he, quote, should bring up Owen Young's name, close quotes, when talking with Hammond. Quote, it strikes me that he might be an exceptionally good approach to Mr. Young, but I do not want to do anything which would disturb your relationship with bracketed Hammond, or which would seem unreasonable to him. So if you would rather have Mr. Young not mentioned, I wish you would let me know. I think there's a close quote there. Charles Hedges had obviously dropped Hammond's and Young's names together in the same conversation, and now Bill was wondering if he could use this Hammond connection to get a personal introduction to Owen Young.
Mention of Owen Young's name here attests to Wilson's grand vision for approaching the most prominent millionaires in New York City for contributions. Having successfully secured at least some money from the richest man in America, it seemed perfectly logical to Bill that he should continue his fundraising efforts by making direct appeals to other men who sat very near the pinnacle of the country's economic pyramid. Owen D. Young was exactly that kind of man. He had created the Radio Corporation of America, RCA, in 1919, helped found the National Broadcasting Company, NBC, in the mid-1920s, and been sitting on the board of trustees for the Rockefeller Foundation since 1928. In 1932, Young was even considered a strong dark horse candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination, an honor that went to Franklin D. Roosevelt instead. Young was a titan of industry, but Wilson was confident he could enlist him in their cause once he had given the chance to make an appeal based on the 2 chapters from his book, these new testimonials he had just received, and the fact that they already sobered up a remarkable number of men.
Bill assured Charles Hedges that if there were any objection to him asking Hammond for an introduction to Owen Young, it would not be a problem. Quote, we have other approaches to him, end quote, he noted confidently. Obviously, Wilson was aware of Young's position as a trustee of the Rockefeller Foundation, and he was equally confident Willard Richardson would be able to facilitate an introduction for him, should that prove necessary.
Keeping the New York group in the loop.
In an effort to keep the Rockefeller Group well informed about all of his activities and as closely involved in their progress as possible, Bill's next 3 letters were sent to Albert Scott, Willard Richardson, and Frank Amos. The first of these went to Scott, thanking him for the fine letter of recommendation he had sent them, assuring him it would be, quote, used discreetly and with regard to good taste, end quote. Scott's letter had been mailed on July 1st, so Bill also made the necessary apologies for his delayed response, explaining he had been out of town recently. Bill then profusely thanked Scott and his associates for the, quote, monies you have placed at our disposal, the lengths to which you have gone to look after our needs, and the spirit in which these things have been done, end quote. Wilson could hardly have been more generous in his praise of Scott and the other members of the Rockefeller Circle. They were, after all, the solid foundation upon which he was hoping to build a broad network of other wealthy supporters and donors. Scott's brief letter of introduction, multiple copies were supplied, vouched for his faith in the new movement, making it a valuable piece of paper in New York City in 1938, one that would surely open a number of important doors, allowing Bill, Fitz, and Hank to make their appeals directly to some of New York City's most elite citizens.
This is on the printed letterhead with Lockwood Green Engineers Incorporated, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, New York. July 1, 1938. To whom it may concern. This will introduce William G. Wilson, J. Fitzhugh Mayo, and Henry G. Parkhurst. These men are part of a fellowship of 100 ex-alcoholics who have recovered on a basis which in most aspects is new. Most of them have been pronounced medically incurable. I've followed their work with much interest and know personally that these men have sound medical endorsement. I gladly vouch for what they may say to you. Truly yours, Albert Earl Scott, President.
It should be pointed out that this claim of success for, quote, 100 ex-alcoholics, end quote, by July 1938, July 1st, 1938, is an inflated number. More good marketing than an accurate reflection of the true number of sober AA members at that point. Now, it is also worth noting that, quote unquote, 100 is the number constantly and consistently bandied about without any increase whatsoever for the next 9 months, right up until the day the book was published in early April. To accept the accuracy of this number on July 1st, 1938 is to believe either no further recoveries were made during the following 9 months, unlikely, or that Bill Wilson consistently disregarded all of the additional members gained between July and August, equally unlikely. 100 is much more believable as the number of the successful recoveries by the time the book was published, although even this has been challenged. But at this point of the story, 100 ex-alcoholics was more smart marketing than any kind of accurate reflection of reality.
Bill and Ruth type up 2 extra copies of his letter to Albert Scott, and sent these along with his letter to Willard Richardson, asking that the extra copy be passed on to A. Leroy Chipman. Wilson also repeated his invitation to the 3 Rockefeller men, one he had obviously made several times before. Let me say again that we should like to have yourself, Mr. Chipman, and Mr. Scott come to any and all of our Tuesday night gatherings without waiting to be asked. Certainly in the case of you gentlemen, we shall gladly waive the heavy drinking that has qualified us for Alcoholics Anonymous. By common consent, you gentlemen are in the fold. We think you are one of us, and there are no honorary members. The casual use of alcoholics, quote unquote, Alcoholics Anonymous here provides concrete evidence that this new name had decisively entered the vocabulary of the New York Fellowship in the 6 short weeks since its first appearance in Hank's Ideas, and There Is a Solution. Bill then had Ruth type up yet another copy of his letter to Albert Scott, and he sent this one to Frank Amos. There was no need to extend a Tuesday night invitation to Amos. He was already close enough to Wilson and Parkhurst to have accepted their offer to visit the weekly meeting on more than one occasion, usually bringing his wife with him. Frank was much more involved in the day-to-day operations of the fellowship at this point, receiving regular office visits from both men. So Bill's letter focused on a recent and very exciting development in their plans to spread the program beyond the confines of just Akron and New York. Dear Frank, I'm enclosing a copy of our letter of thanks to Mr. Scott. Just received an enthusiastic letter from our Springfield protege, which is also enclosed with a copy of my reply. These 2 letters will give you a clear idea of how this thing takes root and how it is likely to spread. It is just a question of getting live wires of this description into action throughout the country, and then being able to follow them up and help them out. I feel that the book will uncover hundreds of men of Mr. Furlong's description. Much yours, Bill, WGW, RH.
Ray Furlong, spreading the word beyond Akron and New York.
The Springfield protege was Ray Furlong, and the great news in his letter was that he was back in Springfield, Massachusetts, staying sober and doing his very best to spread the work among the other alcoholics there. Despite his lack of immediate success, Ray was a perfect example of what Bill Wilson had been advocating for months. One man would get sober and then go back to his hometown, carrying the message about their program of recovery to others and offering his own sobriety as proof of its effectiveness. If this could work with a man who had been exposed to the fellowship directly, there was no reason to think it wouldn't also work for someone who was introduced to their program by simply reading the book. Furlong had spent a week in Towns Hospital in early 1938, but he started experimenting with, quote, a little controlled drinking, end quote, shortly after he arrived back home. Predictably, this spun out of control in fairly short order. After a particularly spectacular drunk on Tuesday, June 6, his wife packed him up the next morning and drove him 150 miles to New York City, where she re-delivered him to Towns Hospital. Calming her fears of yet another relapse, Dr. Silkworth assured her that this time he felt, quote, he really had something that would work, end quote, for Ray. 3 days later, Silkworth's promised solution arrived in the person of two members of the New York Fellowship. One came during the day and another had visited him later that night, who told Ray that they had been exactly like him not so long ago, but now they were free of their obsession for drink. The next day was Sunday, and Ray was visited by a third recovered alcoholic who carried a spiritual message, one that Furlong later described as, quote, a simple day-by-day-to-day plan of faith, end quote. The bedridden man was not just convinced, he surrendered completely, making a, quote, final agreement to let God be first in my life, end quote, after which he claimed, quote, the whole outlook and horizon brightened up in a manner which I am unable to describe except to say that it was glorious, end quote. This turnaround was so convincing that the following day Ray's new friend insisted he leave Towns Hospital and come stay at his home in New Jersey, which Furlong did. The next night, Tuesday, June 14th, Ray was taken to the meeting in Brooklyn, where he would have heard about Jim Burwell's ongoing slip and also been introduced to Ebby Thatcher, who had just returned from his own recent bout with alcohol. At that meeting, Ray said he found a group of men who were just like himself, but, quote, telling of a liberty of living unmatched by anything I had ever seen, end quote. He felt like he was home at last. Shortly after this, Ray returned to Springfield, rejoined his wife in their stationery store business, and began to set his life in order. Essential to that recovery was the need to work with others. But all of his initial attempts failed, and with the typical alcoholic expectation of being wildly successful in his first 3 or 4 weeks, he wrote to Bill Wilson in some despair, wondering what he was doing wrong, asking for advice, and suggesting perhaps he needed to come back to Brooklyn for a short refresher course. Wilson's response, a copy of which was sent to Amos along with Ray's original letter, was both enthusiastic and candid.
Mr. R.A. Furlong, Empire Stationers, 305 Bridge Street, Springfield, Massachusetts. Dear R.A., you bet your wife you and your wife can come. Plan to stay the night with us. We have the meetings on Tuesday evenings during the summer. They're usually held at my house, but not always. So you had better give us a few days' notice so we can let you know if there's any change of plan or possible omission of the meeting. I cannot tell you how delighted I am about what you say about yourself, your wife, and those men you are working with. We know that you are on the right track, and it was the impression of everyone who talked with you down here that you would be sure to make good, particularly if you took an interest in seeing that others enjoy the chance you have. Christ as an idea is fine, but Christ in action is a power which has no limitation. We have had a slew of experience working with these drunks. It is sometimes a heartbreaking business, and we have learned not to be disturbed when our desires in the matter were not fulfilled. These men as a class remind us of a forest through which a great fire has swept. All of the trees are charred on the outside, and there appears to be no worthwhile timber left. But a good part of the trees were once strong, and the wood was straight-grained. We have discovered in our work that if these are not too badly charred, they make great timber, even better for their seasoning in the fire. But those trees which are bent and knotted and useless before the fire are likely to remain that way, whatever we do. It is true that anything is possible through Christ, but I think we assume a great deal, considering our own incapacity to demonstrate his principles, if we think everybody we touch is going to get well. We have had a lot of conceit knocked out of us in that direction. However, the way to learn is to keep on working. I had some hard schooling myself for the first 8 or 10 cases I dealt with, never got anywhere, and there have been lots more since. I feel that I have always learned more from the failures than from the successes. Don't take yourself or these men and their problems too seriously. I believe that God wants us to be naturally and joyously happy. To be otherwise is to limit our effectiveness in this skeptical old world. Yours, Bill, WGW, RH.
One thing that stands out starkly in this letter is Wilson's explicit mention of Jesus Christ as God, something he rarely did in print. Bill is almost certainly responding here to the use of Christ's name in Ray's letter, but it is also obvious Wilson is very comfortable with this kind of religiously specific talk. This is hardly surprising since all of the believing members of Alcoholics Anonymous in New York at this time were Christian, and any talk among them about religion or spirituality would necessarily have been framed in those terms. One further reason for Bill's comfort level with talk of Christ as God was the fact that at this time, reading from the New Testament was still a regular part of the meeting format for AA, even in Brooklyn. Given all of those circumstances, who else would you talk about when you talked about God? Also of interest here is Bill's metaphor of the forest devastated by a great fire. This sounded very much like a figure of speech he had developed and perfected for use in his presentation of potential donors, and one that he uses again in later letters. The fire is a rich metaphor, one that can cut both ways. As Wilson emphasizes, despite outward appearances, some of these charred timbers are not only salvageable, but actually better for having been seasoned in the fire. On the other hand, hearkening back to Dr. Richard's point that there were some damaged people who just can't be saved, he notes that those who are, quote, bent and knotted and useless before the fire, end quote, and they are, quote, are likely to remain that way whatever we do, end quote. Alcoholic Anonymous members were completely dedicated to working with drunks who could be saved, but they had no interest in squandering their time and energy on those who were hopeless for whatever reason.
Reverend Ward, a link to wealthy New York donors.
The seventh letter Bill wrote that day went to the Reverend C.E.B. Ward, an activist Presbyterian minister with deep contacts among rich donors in New York City. Willard Richardson had encouraged Bill to meet with Ward, but despite phone calls and letters, the two men had managed to miss each other throughout late June and the first half of July. Bill was anxious to talk to Ward and was hoping he could convince him to come to Brooklyn to attend one of their Tuesday night meetings so that he could see with his own eyes the miracles being worked there.
My dear Mr. Ward, the best laid plans of mice and men gang aftergly. What with being unable to reach you on the phone and having been out of town for some time, we have not gotten together as Mr. Richardson suggested we might. Each Tuesday evening at my house, 182 Clinton Street, Brooklyn, we have an informal meeting of ex-alcoholics and their families to which newcomers may come for assistance. These meetings are so informal, they may startle you a bit, but they do meet our needs. We would like you to come to the next one if you so desire, so that we may become better acquainted. My Brooklyn telephone number is Main 43220, and you take either the East Side or West Side subway from New York, getting off at Borough Hall, where you will be within 3 or 4 blocks of my house. People commence to drop in around 6 o'clock, and we have a buffet supper. Everyone stays as long as they like, which is sometimes for the night. So for next Tuesday evening, please feel free that you are one of us, and on that afternoon, will you phone my house and let whoever answers know that you will be there? If you cannot make it this Tuesday, please feel free to come later, though you might phone in advance, as sometimes the meetings are omitted or held at another place. Very much yours, William G. Wilson, WGW, RH.
Both this letter and the one to Ray Furlong mentioned that people occasionally stayed overnight after the meeting. So, quote, the Wilson Hotel, quote, quotes, was obviously still open for business on Clinton Street. Bill also tells Ward a buffet supper was always served, making it sound as if Lois was buying and preparing enough food for the entire group each week. But this was really more of a potluck affair, with food contributions coming from the wives who also attended these meetings.
Keeping Dr. Bob informed.
Having addressed all of AA's helpers and potential supporters on the East Coast, Bill's final letter of the day went to Bob Smith, providing him with a recap of his trip, quote, down south, barnstorming through Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, etc., end quote, and proudly reporting on their success with the 2 famous psychiatrists at Johns Hopkins. Bill assured Dr. Bob these endorsements would make a significant difference in their effort to raise money. Quote, the old juggernaut of fundraising bounces along, still in low gear, but shifting soon, I think, to second, end quote. For Bill Wilson, shifting into second gear meant he would now be so caught up in fundraising that he had no idea when he would be able to visit Akron again, certainly not any time in the near future. Explaining this delay, he notes that, quote, Mr. Scott has just given me letters of introduction, and we plan to put the bite on such people as Owen D. Young, Mr. Stettinius, Sloan, and such like without delay, end quote. Bill's sights could not be set any higher. In addition to the already mentioned Owen D. Young of RCA and NBC fame, Bill now plans to solicit Edward Stettinius, chairman of the board of U.S. Steel and later Secretary of State under FDR and Harry Truman, and also Alfred P. Sloan, the president and CEO of General Motors. Bill Wilson was clearly not intimidated by the prospect of making his pitch to these titans of industry who were among the richest and most powerful men in the country. Bill signed off this exuberant and chatty letter to Bob without asking for either his opinion or his consent on any of these weighty matters. It was either a foregone conclusion or perhaps Bill just didn't feel he needed it. He simply closes the letter by sending, quote, best wishes to dear Annie and yourself and all the whirling dervishes. Amen, end quote. That final salutation sounds lighthearted enough, but it is unclear whether his quote-unquote whirling dervishes comment was Bill's jesting way of referring to the Akron brethren, or if it was just as a private joke between the 2 men about the Akron group members, both sober and non-alcoholic, who were still so outraged by Wilson's efforts to raise large sums of money to further his plans for the expansion of AA. Whatever Bill meant by that remark, given all of his own frenzied activities on this particular Friday, July 15th, 1938, anyone looking for a whirling dervish could start right there in Newark, New Jersey. There was surely no need to travel all the way to Akron to find one.
Stuff, isn't it? An office downgrade.
But dictating letters wasn't the only commotion going on at the honor dealer's office. Bill and A's temporary headquarters that week. The business had just gone through an upheaval, having moved with all of their furniture from the 9th floor at 11 Hill Street, where they'd been located for at least a year and a half, into smaller and more economical space around the corner and 1 block north at 17 Williams Street. That kind of packing and unpacking is both time-consuming and disruptive, so it is not surprising Bill waited until Friday the 15th before heading over to Newark for Ruth's help in typing these letters. Strangely, Bill didn't seem to have any idea was planning to move Honor Dealers to a new location on July 1st. In his July 24th reply to the McGuire letter, he had noted, quote, "This letter is being written from my house in Brooklyn. So you now have this address as well as that of our Jersey office," end quote. But the only address McGuire had been given was the New Jersey office was 11 Hill Street. And it's hard to believe Bill Wilson would have made this kind of mistake with such an important potential donor. It is, of course, possible Bill was so completely disconnected from the day-to-day operations at Honor Dealers that he had no idea the lease was about to run out and that a move was imminent. But it is also possible that Bill had gotten himself into such a serious trouble But it is also possible that Hank had gotten himself into such serious trouble with the Hill Street landlord and was forced into this hurried move at the last minute.
In any case, the lease for Hill Street was terminated at the end of June, and Honor Dealers began operating out of their new William Street location on July 1st, 1938. By July 15th, when Ruth typed these letters, she was neatly crossing out the, quote, 11 Hill Street, end quote, line on the pre-printed, quote unquote, Henry G. Parkhurst stationery and typing in the, quote, 17 William Street, end quote, address directly beneath it. The new offices, a small 2-room suite numbered 601, were on the 6th floor of the building, and Hank's business would stay there throughout the time Bill wrote the remaining chapters of the Big Book. 10 months later, Henry G. Parkhurst Incorporated was forced to move again, this time when the sheriff appeared at his door in May 1939 with an eviction notice for non-payment of rent. Even in the face of this disaster, the ever-resourceful Hank managed to negotiate a deal so that he and Ruth could move into a much smaller office on the other side of the same floor of the building, number 604. It was, Bill claimed, quote, a tiny room barely big enough to contain Henry's large desk, his overstuffed chair, a couple of file cabinets, and Ruth and her typewriter. For callers, there was standing room only, end quote. Such was the rapidly declining fortune of Honor Dealers.
Dr. Richards approves of the book.
During the week following this flurry of communication, Bill received a letter from Dr. Esther Richards that validated all his enthusiasm for the visit to Johns Hopkins. Dr. Homan had read the 2 chapters of the book almost immediately and had been lavish in his praise when Bill, Fitz, and Ebby visited him a few days later. Although Richards attended this second meeting, she had not yet read the 2 chapters and didn't do so until Sunday, July 17th. But once done, she was equally impressed with the prospectus package they had left for her. The very next day, she wrote Bill a letter expressing her enthusiastic support for the work he was doing, providing him with a testimonial letter full of specific, concrete, professional praise for all of his recovery efforts.
Baltimore, Maryland, July 18, 1938. Mr. William G. Wilson, 182 Clinton Street, Brooklyn, New York. Dear Mr. Wilson, yesterday, for the first time, I had a chance to look over the prospectus of Alcoholics Anonymous. I can give it no higher compliment than to say that I read through the first 2 chapters without stopping. So gripping was the presentation of the material. If all the chapters are like this, you will have a book that will hold its readers spellbound. These 2 chapters are the embodiment of what makes any book great. They have something to say, and what they have to say is presented in clear, concise, graphic words. It carries the reader on and on with pictures to tell the story of real-life facts. There is no attempt at highbrow theories veneered with scientific and psychological worthiness. What you say carried the conviction of truth. I know that you have a great thing in this message, and if you keep it on the same plane, the book will go over hot. I think you should get a #1 physician who has a wide knowledge of the alcoholic's medical and social problems to write an introduction. I am keeping the manuscript for a bit, but will return it presently. I should indeed like to have the manuscript of the succeeding chapters when they are ready. Needless to say, if there is anything I can do to be of help in the presentation of this book or in the furtherance of your work, I would consider it a privilege to be called upon. With kindly regards, I am yours, and very sincerely yours, Esther L. Richards. Esther L. Richards, MD.
If Wilson had any doubts about his ability to write a book, this letter must have allayed at least some of those fears and convinced him that he did, in fact, have the necessary talent to be an effective prose writer. What could be more positive than Richard's opinion that the chapters were gripping, that they hold the reader spellbound, and her conviction that the book would, quote, go over hot once it was completed? It's hard to imagine any letter being more favorable than this, even if Bill had written it himself. Wilson had copies of Dr. Richards' letter made, and this glowing testimonial was included in all future mailings that went out to prospective donors. The next Friday, Bill was once again in New Jersey, this time dictating a long reply to Richards. Given her open-ended invitation to be helpful, quote, in preparation of this book or in the furtherance of your work, end quote, Wilson was happy to explain to her in great detail exactly where they were in the development of their program and what their immediate needs were.
Bill makes his case for finding donors.
He opened the letter with a half page of pleasantries, thanking Richards for her, quote, spontaneous and enthusiastic reaction, end quote, and then offering her this perspective on the origin of their program of recovery.
As you see, we've been finding our way along in a way which we had feared was rather haphazard and amateurish, though some of us felt as long as 3 years ago that out of old and well-known elements we might compound a synthesis which would possess new and rather startling powers in this field.
This explanation of the origins of the AA program is wonderful in its candid admission of the debt that they owe to, quote, old and well-known elements, end quote, while simultaneously claiming that the synthesis they have forged from those elements is something new and startling in its effectiveness. Having dispensed with the formalities, Bill began his presentation of their current dilemma.
Our work thus far has been on a part-time voluntary basis, but we have now come to a new phase of the work, and there is one aspect of it which we are approaching very gingerly and reluctantly. That is the question of how we can carry on from this point without several individuals spending the greater part of their time at it. The publication of this book, the acceleration of our personal work, the building up of sufficient individuals who will be trained to cope with the influx of new patients who are bound to appear as soon as the book is published. How to handle this situation has become a puzzle. Those of us who ought to be spending for the next year or two a great deal of time in the work are confronted by the necessity of either being subsidized to do so or else letting up on the alcoholic activity and paying more attention to business. Most of us feel that this thing has to go on if we have to live in tents. The beginning has been made by some friends of Mr. Rockefeller, and a very modest subsidy has been placed at the disposal of one of our most effective men, who has a group of about 70 cases in Akron, Ohio. This man is a surgeon who has been obliged to neglect his practice in order to keep up the work. The underwriting takes care of his bare necessities for a year, with the thought that he will secure some additional surgical work. Though we are most anxious that this thing be not professionalized or that no one have a vested interest in a job, it begins to look as though several more people will have to be similarly provided for to carry our experiment on for another year and to get out our book.
Wilson's clear emphasis here is on the very temporary nature of their need for a subsidy to support several more people so they can carry on the work. But he claims this need for financial help should go away rather quickly once the book is published, allowing them to become self-supporting.
We feel that the book will provide some revenue and that at a later date we can easily fill any number of sanitariums with these people if it became apparent to the public that any of them were really getting well. So we are positive that the time will eventually come when we will be self-supporting. By temperament, we are a pretty independent lot and do not like being subsidized by charitable sources, nor would we care to be taken care of by any of the large foundations or churches. Our power for good depends to quite an extent on absolute independence of religious sects or institutions. We are seeking to make our experience available on a universal and worldwide basis. Hence, we would prefer not to become too heavily committed in any way to any person or denomination.
This is a revealing paragraph with its vision of, quote, any number of sanitariums, end quote, under their control, and his unequivocally stated position of, quote, absolute independence of religious sects and institutions, end quote. The integrity of both of these important features was to be ensured by a foundation, which here creatively called Fellowship Anonymous, that they are in the process of setting up. This foundation will administer the funds they collect in such a fashion that their work will be above reproach or criticism by skeptics.
We are setting up a sort of foundation of our own, which will be called, let us say, Fellowship Anonymous. This will be administered by non-alcoholics who are responsible and disinterested. All of our money transactions will be handled through this corporation. This is the best thing we could think of to forestall any criticism that as individuals, we are trying to capitalize our knowledge of what to do for alcoholics.
Wilson then follows this with the interesting conviction that the most likely source of donations to this foundation will be the great but, quote, unquote, soulless corporation of America.
Our idea is raising funds is to go to the large corporations. These companies are riddled with alcoholics, both actual and potential. We can offer them our services, and I have no doubt we can return a lot of talented men to their jobs. Therefore, a corporation, however soulless, has a direct financial interest in such a result. One of my best friends used to make $40,000 a year with the Standard Oil Company, and they had to let him go because of drinking. It cost them a lot of money to train him for such a responsible position and a lot more to train a man to fill his place. Why then should not such a company contribute to our fund? They will spend millions to find a new kind of solder for a tin can, so we think they will help along our experiment for much the same reason.
The notion that a corporation willing to spend, quote unquote, millions to find a new kind of solder for a tin can should also be willing to spend a few $1,000s to preserve their investment in talented personnel is an argument Bill used in more than one letter, and it seems safe to assume was also a part of the presentation he made to wealthy industrialists whenever he was given the chance to do so in person. At this time, Johns Hopkins was the richest and best-funded hospital in the country. So Wilson closed his letter with the veiled suggestion that perhaps Dr. Esther Richards might have some knowledge of one or more of these wealthy donors. Quote, I hope I have not been taking liberties in writing to you at this length, but we wanted your real opinion touching these matters. Perhaps you can make some helpful suggestions or criticisms, end quote. 2.5 weeks later, when Esther Richards finally responded to Bill, she gracefully sidestepped the entire issue of money and the question of who might be a potential donor, focusing instead on her contention that there were a large number of mentally challenged people who are not suitable candidates for Wilson's brand of recovery. Her tacit response made it clear that Bill should not expect to receive any help locating or courting donors from that particular source.
A high-profile connection, Dr. Richard Cabot.
Either later that same day or sometime over the weekend, Bill Wilson visited Towns Hospital, where he met with both Charles Towns and Dr. William Silkworth. He wanted to strategize with them about how he could most effectively approach potential donors, and in the course of these discussions, he asked both men for their written recommendations concerning the work they'd been doing. In addition, he requested their help in soliciting the support of other medical authorities, hopefully famous doctors whose names would be instantly recognizable to the wealthy patrons of New York City. On Monday, Towns wrote to Bill.
My dear Wilson, after our talk, I thought this matter over, and as I had promised to write something to you regarding the work, and I thought this was an unusual opportunity for me to state all of the findings to Dr. Cabot, and in this way kill two birds with the one stone. Very truly yours, Charles B. Towns.
Although the Towns letter to Dr. Cabot has not been preserved, his letter was positive enough that Bill included a copy of it in future solicitation packages he sent out to prospects. Dr. Richard Clark Cabot was famous not only for his prestigious lineage, parenthesis, quote, "So this is good old Boston, the home of the bean and the cod, where the Lowells talk only to the Cabots and the Cabots talk only to God," end quote, close parenthesis, but also for his tireless advocacy of the downtrodden and the poor. He believed that economic, social, family, and psychological conditions underpin many of the problems that patients brought to the outpatient department he ran at Massachusetts General Hospital. In 1905, Cabot invented the position of quote-unquote social worker to assist him at the hospital, and even went so far as to pay her salary when the hospital refused to do so. When Cabot finally left Mass General in 1919 to take up the chair of Harvard's Department of Social Ethics, the hospital finally agreed to pay the wages of the 13 social workers he had personally employed for the past several years. Dr. Cabot was also a medical innovator in the field of hematology and the author of more than a dozen books relating to medical, social, and ethical topics. Shortly after Charles Towns' letter was mailed, Bill followed up by sending Cabot a copy of the 2 chapters of the proposed book, along with his own personal appeal, repeating many of the details and even some of the same phrases that he had used in his letter to Dr. Richards.
July 1938, Dr. Richard C. Cabot, 101 Brattle Street, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Dear Dr. Cabot, Mr. Charles B. Towns tells me he has written you concerning some work which has been going on among alcoholics here in New York and in Akron, Ohio. At his request, I'm enclosing the 2 opening chapters of an anonymous volume which we shall publish sometime during the next 12 months. This material will give you the general idea of the nature and temper of our work. As you will see, we have taken certain old and well-known elements and have related them in such a way as to produce a synthesis which has some new and novel results and characteristics. You will observe the central idea is that an alcoholic who has had a spiritual experience upon the simple basis which is outlined, and who is armed with certain information about the physical and mental aspects of his own malady, can apparently do for another sufferer those things rarely, if ever, accomplished by a non-alcoholic. The great promise of the thing, of course, is that each man in his turn must see that still others recover or perhaps perish himself. This provides impetus and a growth possibility which greatly excites the imagination of those of us who are close to the situation. We have never developed any accurate statistical information, but I should say that we have dealt with about 200 cases in all, about half of whom seem to have recovered. Doctors tell us that almost without exception, we have been problem drinkers of a class commonly regarded as next to hopeless. We want to place these facts in your possession for whatever use they may be to you, and it may be that you would like to investigate or become in some fashion or other a part of our effort. As you see, we are about to publish a book, and in addition, it has become necessary for a number of individuals to spend much time at the work. We think that within a year, the work through channels unnecessary to discuss here will become self-supporting. In the meantime, we frankly need some assistance. It seems right that you should know these facts, so I hope you will not regard this letter as a solicitation for a contribution. However, your personal interest advice, and approval will be much prized by all of us. Sincerely yours, William G. Wilson, WGW, RH.
There is no known response from Cabot, and it's unlikely he even bothered to write back, a fairly predictable reaction given his notoriety, his current retirement, and the fact that he was in failing health and died just 9 months later.
The Silkworth letter.
While Charlestown's testimonial letter generated no lasting results, Bill's request that Dr. Silkworth write about the success of their work did produce something of genuine importance. As his endorsement, Silkworth sent Bill the following letter of introduction, a letter which would later become, in slightly modified form, an integral part of the doctor's opinion, the opening chapter of the Big Book.
July 27, 1938. To whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. About 4 years ago, I attended a patient by the name of William G. Wilson. Though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, he was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. I personally know 30 of these cases who were of types upon which other methods had failed completely. These facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group. These events may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a solution for thousands of these situations. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. Very truly yours, W.D. Silkworth, M.D.
The doctor had obviously accepted Wilson's contention that there were more than 100 current success stories in AA, and he bolstered this claim by saying he personally knew 30 of these cases in New York, parenthesis, leaving a balance of the often noted 70 members in Akron, close parenthesis. Before being published in the Big Book, the specific reference to a patient, quote, by the name of William G. Wilson, end quote, was removed, and the single word, quote unquote, who was substituted. There were some other minor cosmetic changes made to the text, but the substance of the letter was left untouched.
Bill's cover letter for the book proposal.
Having collected all of these glowing references, the final element Bill needed was a cover letter to introduce these endorsements and the 2 chapters of their proposed book to prominent businessmen. The form letter he created contained a brief and excellent presentation of his case and ended with a classic salesman's closer, his request for an appointment to discuss the matter further.
182 Clinton Street, Brooklyn, New York. During the past 4 years, approximately 100 men have recovered from acute alcoholism. We have been told by authorities at the Johns Hopkins Hospital that persons of this class are largely incurable by medical means. As you are no doubt aware, alcoholism ranks with cancer and tuberculosis as a problem. Economically and socially, it is more destructive than either. The United States is said to contain 1 million people who are actual or potential alcoholics. This refers to those who are really sick and not to those who merely drink too much. Until recently, there has been no answer for any substantial part of those who suffer from this common malady. As a citizen and a businessman, we think that you will be interested to know that this group of 100 men have apparently found the answer to a most baffling human problem. Enough has been done to suggest that wholesale recoveries may be possible. Medical men who understand our procedure express this opinion as the attached letters suggest. One of these is an introduction from Mr. Albert L. Scott, who is president of Lockwood Green Engineers Incorporated and also chairman of the Board of Trustees of Riverside Church. He has taken a nationally prominent part in studies of the alcoholic problem. Dr. W.D. Silkworth of Towns Hospital, New York City, and Dr. Esther L. Richards of the Psychiatric Department of the Johns Hopkins Hospital further vouch for what is taking place. Our fellowship is about to publish an anonymous book describing our experiences and methods. This book ought to drive the entering wedge for an expansion of our activities. As you will see from the attached manuscript, we are not reformers in the usual sense of the word. We merely wish to be helpful to those who suffer from alcoholism. Our services have been entirely voluntary and free. As one of the fellowship, I am approaching you with two things in mind. Our work has now reached the stage where we frankly need the assistance of a number of men prominent in American life. The second point is that we wish to make our knowledge and methods more useful to the American home and business. Should you wish to see me, when may I call upon you? Sincerely yours, William G. Wilson, WGW, RH.
Bill had spent the entire month of July soliciting testimonials praising the work AA was doing in the hope these professional endorsements would prove to be the perfect introduction for him and his organization as they approached some of the richest men in the country for donations. Who could possibly resist this request for contributions in the light of these overwhelming positive statements? That was the theory. Now it's time to find out if that theory would actually work in practice.
Bon voyage.
On Friday, July 29th, Bill and Lois were on Pier 21 in Manhattan for a bon voyage party aboard the SS American Farmer. Bill's sister Dorothy and her husband, Dr. Leonard Strong, along with their two children, were sailing to England for a month-long vacation. But Bill, ever the promoter, clearly had other things on his mind that day, arriving at the party with typed copies of the first two chapters of the book, which he proudly showed around to both friends and strangers. One of these strangers, Virginia McLeod, recalled that day to Bill in a 1960 letter.
I think about the first time I met you. It was on the pier that Dot and Len, bracketed Strong, sailed from on that first trip they took to Europe. I had driven them down. Your mother was there in a pretty red hat. And while you were standing around, while we were standing around, you and Lois came. And I was so interested to meet you both because Dot and Len had talked of you both so much. You had the printed manuscript, typed, I mean, of some chapters of the book, and you put it in my hands.
The compulsively focused Bill Wilson was taking every possible opportunity to talk about their new quote-unquote cure for alcoholism and the book he was writing about it. Virginia would soon become deeply involved in the alcoholic community, and in this same letter, she recalled her first reaction to those two chapters that Bill put in her hands.
Strange thing happened. A queer feeling flowed over me, through me, and around me. And I can't explain what an odd sort of power it was. As I read a few of the words of the manuscript, I felt I already knew them by heart. I got goose flesh, and that strange power has been a factor in my life ever since.
However colored the memory of her first reaction may have been by the passage of time, Virginia's claim that she, quote-unquote, got the message immediately did result in her becoming a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous not long after that first meeting with Bill and Lois. Now, if only some of those people with money would be equally impressed with the two chapters that Bill had written.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, our readers, of course, in the chapter 11, Chasing Testimonials, July 1938. Now, that deserves from a round of applause. Wonderful stuff. You can unmute yourselves if you'd like. I'm sure you will. Go on to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. What a great read.
Great stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, David, for organizing this. Thank you, Bill, for writing it.
That's just so good. I heard all of Wilson's plan in that, Bill Schaberg. I must come to you that in a second. I heard so much of his plan and his vision and all of that chapter there. But I want to go to Randy before I go to you, Bill, because Randy is going to tell us a little bit about Bon Voyage and the addenda. Randy, you're there, I'm sure.
Yes, Randy, alcoholic. On Mr. Schauberg's webpage,
Tomato, tomato.
there's for those who have early copies of the book, there is an addenda, which multiple editions that bring us up to date with the sixth printing are available from, like I say, from his webpage. Thank you.
Great stuff, Randy. And with that, we just go straight to Bill. Back to Bill Sherberg.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Randy. Yeah, there's a couple of addenda. There's a large addenda that goes at the very end of the book, and there's this one. But over and above that, there's also an errata. And quite frankly, after a couple of slip-ups on early chapters during this reading, I realized that what I needed to do was to make hand corrections in my own copy of this book that I'm reading from with those errata updates. So we do this on a Saturday, so every Friday I pull out the list of errata and I just do the corrections for this particular upcoming chapter, because I'm doing all of them would take too damn long. But doing just one chapter at a time is easy enough, and then it works out. So there's that. I would suggest making those changes in your book with I use a blue ink pen so that they stick out, and I do that. I thought there was just a couple of things there. I mean, it was all those letters, and I really thought about, kind of sidestepping a whole bunch of that, because it gets kind of repetitious, over and over again. But then again, that was the point. That's what this guy was doing on one solid day in Newark, New Jersey. It's like you can't understand or appreciate how much work was going into that particular day in the office if you don't go, wade your way through all the letters. So hopefully that doesn't bore people. The other thing was, of course, that interesting letter to where he mentions Christ and God so strongly. Really an interesting thing to be doing. And again, I presume that that's in response to something that Ray Furlong had written to him. It wasn't just something that he threw in arbitrarily. He was, Bill's a politician. He's trying to, make sure he's in the same sandbox with people that they're going to play this game. So he was doing that. And then, it's so he's talking in a bunch of these letters, we get one guy sober, and he's going to go get two guys sober. And then those two guys are going to go get two guys sober. And those two guys are going to get four guys sober. And then they're going to get 8 guys, 16 guys. It's a perfect description of a pyramid scheme that actually has worked. So I don't know that I've ever witnessed it or experienced it when he was writing that stuff that way. But I was like, damn, it's nothing but a pyramid scheme he's got going here. But it did work. So good.
Oh, good stuff.
It's late. So let's just rock and roll, David.
Yeah, we got rock and roll. We'll go to Jim. I want to go to Jim as well. Can try and get Jim in as well. And Jim Worley, of course.
Thank you, David. Every time I read that letter that Bill just mentioned, it always gets to me. That analogy that he uses about the trees. The trees being burnt and yet being strong inside, and more so by having been fired. And the fact that the phrase that he uses, I learn a lot more by my failures than I do by my successes. I enjoy this chapter. It's one of my favorites, because it also brings in those some of those heavy hitters that Bill was after. The Johns Hopkins psychiatrist Holman and Richards and those other people. So yeah, it was a good chapter.
Thank you, Jim, for that.
And Jim, I like that forest thing, the wood that gets burned. I'm not sure that it impressed any of these people he was trying to impress with it, but I'm an alcoholic, so I feel much better now that I know I'm better because I got, I got seasoned by the fire, baby, and I'm ready to go now, and I'm a better guy for that purpose. So,
You know, and I hear, you know, there are some people say, oh, well, you know, Bill wasn't a very good writer, and you know, he didn't have much of an education, and he had no training, and but you read some of the stuff that he wrote, and some of it is poetic, you know, and I personally think very well written, and I think he had a great vocabulary. Not that he was searching in the dictionary for words, but he had a big vocabulary that he used.
Yeah.
Some of which is not understood nowadays, but he had one.
yeah, I agree. I agree. And if you don't think Bill's a great writer, just read Hank's stuff.
Thank you, gents. Bill, we can go more deeper into that when you're doing your presentation for us on Friday, I believe, that with the trees, and you do talk about that in Bill's vision and ever-changing plan, and the lengths he had to go to, the efforts he had to go to. Let's go over to our reader, to one of our readers today. Thomas Nias is in Iowa. Thank you, Thomas.
Yes, David. My question is that there's a footnote on 217, and I don't know. I just wondered if, in a very short words, if you could explain what that old business maxim, 2 moves equals 1 fire. What is that about?
Okay, well, that was one that I heard during my business career when we would move an office. They would say, you know, this is going to be bad. You think this is just going to go easy? I moved my office, my business office one time over the Thanksgiving weekend, you know, and they were, that's when a guy told me this, you know, he said, look, you got to be prepared that everything's going to be screwed up for weeks afterwards, because it's just, you know, you think you got it all planned and you think it's all going to work, but it's not. It's like, you know, it's 2 of those things equals all the disruption you'd get if you had a fire in your office. So that kind of thing. 2 moves equals 1 fire.
Yeah, and there was a lot of stuff that was lost. That's how I interpret it too. I mean, there was a lot of stuff lost. I think, Bill, you've mentioned a lot about, you know, when they moved from one office to another, there are a lot of rough drafts of the big book that just, you know, we don't have. You know, when
we don't need this anymore. We don't need this anymore. We don't need this anymore. It's like,
yeah.
I mean, and we all accumulate that kind of stuff. My brother-in-law died a year ago, and we had to go clean out his house. And, you know, there was stuff there from the 80s, for God's sakes. You know, it was just like, you know, I came home and threw out all kinds of stuff here at my house because I was so embarrassed at the stuff that, you know, this really intelligent, sharp guy had cluttered up all over his house, you know? So yeah, you gotta, they were, as soon as you start moving, you think, okay, I don't need that. I don't need that. I don't need that. Give that to Goodwill, honey, you know, that kind of thing. Or throw it in that dumpster we got in the driveway. So.
Great pickup, Tom. And that could be 30 things, Bill. It could be 31 things. That sounds like one of your 30 things. That's his other book. That's Mr. Shipper's other book, if you don't know. 30 things. Dina T, the Big Book Slayer, is with us.
Thank you so much, David. This is Dina, alcoholic. Thank you so much, Bill. What are the 2 chapters that he's handing people to read?
There is a solution in Bill's story.
Okay.
At this time, that's all we got. He doesn't start writing again until September 15th. So anytime we're talking about the chapters in hand, those are the chapters he wrote. He wrote Bill's solution in late May, and I'm sorry, Bill's story in late May, and there is a solution in early June. And he had those things finished. He sent them out for the first time on June 17th. So we know for a fact they were, at least the first drafts of them were done on June 17th. And that's what he's doing here. He's going to a Bon Voyage. I love that. He's going to a Bon Voyage party, and he's like, oh, maybe I can meet somebody here that'll give us some money. So I need to be ready to make the pitch and give them these things, you know, and he gives them to Virginia. Now, Virginia, again, I've said this over, she's one of the Wright sisters. So there's Clarence Snyder's wife, Dorothy. She was a Wright. There's Hank Parker's second wife, Carolyn. She's a Wright. And then there's Virginia. Virginia, thank you. Thank you. You wouldn't believe how fast I can misremember things. So yes, thank you. Virginia was all, so these three sisters they were just really serious players in early Alcoholics Anonymous, and I keep saying somebody needs to write a book.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. Lovely question. Thank you very much. I'm going to Tom Hitchcock. Tom, you need to run your camera.
how
Tom,
y'all?
Tom, can we put your
Tom, I
camera
am
on?
an alcoholic.
Can you
I
put
had
your
two things.
can you put your can you put your camera on first?
I don't have a camera.
Okay, well, Tom, I have the thing on mute just in case. Go on then. We don't know who you are. You could be anyone.
He's okay.
Oh,
I
you know,
vouched for
Jim
him.
Worley has vouched for you. He's vouched for you. Jim Worley has vouched for you, Tom. You're good.
I hope I won't let him down.
Yes, no, you're good. Jim's here. Go ahead, Tom. It's all
Yeah.
yours.
Well, start with I had two things going. My wife was watching on PBS a program on Martha Graham's dance company, and I was listening to y'all on the earplugs, and so I had two things going. But dance is visual, and your audio. But what I was going to ask, I heard toward the end of the presentation, someone say we had 200 alcoholics and got about half of them sober. And that goes into the face of everybody saying, well, in early AA, everybody got sober. Am I missing something?
No, you're not missing anything at all, Tom. The Wilson always talked about how many failures he had, and he said they just had a ton of failures, and he says that over and over again. And in one of these letters we just read, that was explicit. He said, we've had a lot of success, but we've had a ton of failures. So they really, really did. No, this whole idea that everybody got sober right away is wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice? Don't I know dozens of people over my years in Alcoholics Anonymous who are no longer with us that I wish they had gotten sober?
Yeah, well, I just lived it at 4 months, but that was 34 years ago. I got another question that's kind of off topic. I read once years ago that Fitz Mayo showed up for his draft physical and they found something terminal. Is that true?
I've heard that story also, and I'm not sure, but I believe they discovered a heart condition of some sort. Is kind of what I remember. Jim's nodding his head. Jim goes outside of my area of 18 months here. So, Jim.
Yeah, Tommy. That you're talking about Fitz.
It was
Fitz Mayo. They went in. They found that he had cancer.
Oh.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, in the time I've only heard it once. And I wanted confirmation.
Yeah.
And thank you, Jim, for backing me up. I appreciate
it. You're welcome, Tommy. Take care.
And I got some questions for you.
Thanks for jumping on, Tom. Appreciate it.
You send them to me.
We haven't got Mr. Sherbrooke for much long. I think we have you for 5 minutes, Bill. I think
or less. Let's do Gigi.
Well, we got Gigi. We finished with Gigi, and if you want to stick around, we can I can contact Bill. We put his details in the chat. Gigi, all yours.
Thank you, David. My question is brief. I just want to clarify something. In the footnotes for the Bon Voyage section, it mentions Miss Muriel Strong and Mr. Leonard Strong. I'm assuming those are the children.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Is that it, Gigi? Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, we don't good.
Wow. I always get nervous when Gigi asks questions and when Randy asks questions, and not to mention Azel who left. So anyhow,
we don't have to wait a week for you.
Good.
Yeah, go on, Bill. We don't have to wait a week for you this time because you're coming back to us on Friday. We've got you doing a presentation for us on the Friday night history meeting. I'm so excited about it. And seriously, Bill Wilson's vision and ever-changing plan. Now, listen, if you're into history, you have to watch. This is compulsory. And if I don't see you here, you'll be getting a letter. There'll be a flurry of letters going out to you. A flurry of letters. So with that, Mr. Sherbrooke, back to you, sir. And again, let's hear it for the chapter. Of course, what a wonderful chapter that was. Wonderful
Thank
stuff.
you.
Chapter 11, Chasing Testimonials.
Thank you.
I loved it.
Good.
Okay, Bill, all yours.
Let's close with the evening Gatha. Always a good reminder. Always a good reminder for me. Let me respectfully remind you. Life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by and opportunity is lost. Each of us should strive to awaken to the present moment. Take heed. Tonight, your days are diminished by one. Do not squander your life.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, everyone. So, what we have is, I'm going to put the details for that book. Someone's asked me what book was that on the 30 thing. Bill Sherbrooke wrote a book, I think 2 years. Is it 2 years ago now already? Oh my God, is it?
Coming up in August, it'll be 2 years.
God, it's 2 years already. 30 things. I'll put the details for that in the chat very shortly. And that's it, 30 things. Yeah.
I love it when people quote stuff out of that book back to me, you know, or I was going back and forth with a woman who was telling me some problems she was having in email, and she said, so I realized I had to just climb out of the cauldron. I was like, okay, you read chapter 14 or whatever it was, you know, it was great. It was great.
No, we did when we do reading book meetings, and they do. Gigi brings it up a lot, and other people bring it up as well when we're doing it. It's good. We can make a reference to it.
Good. Off to dinner. Thank you all very much. See you Friday.
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bill.
Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you,
Have
Bill.
a great holiday
Thank you,
weekend.
Thank you, Bill.
See you soon.
Great session.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Now, I'm going to put the details, and I'll just show you the book first. 30 Things it's called. THINGS.
What is it?
Read it was. There's so much good detail in it, isn't there? Really, you could read that for. It's a good meditation book if you're into. I want to do.